Hello, family members. How you doing today? I hope you're having a good one. I want to talk about something today that is probably going to get me a little bit of restriction on YouTube. So if you do happen to like my points here, this is the one to share. I don't imagine it's going to do very well because I want to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. Which, all right, before we even get started, I got to stop because this woman has a very unusual first name, and in the press, she's usually referred to like as Ghislaine or Ghislaine or something like that. I've listened to the woman's brother talk about her, and the way that he says her name is Gillen. So that's what I'm going to try to go with. But, you know, I, also, I'm not British, so I'm probably not going to pronounce it right, even though I try. Anyway, so we'll go with Maxwell. Ms. Maxwell is in the press quite a lot these days because of her connection to the whole Epstein sex trafficking network. There we go. We're already started talking about things YouTube doesn't like, but yeah, you can't really talk about this without talking about that. The whole Epstein thing has become a large part of the dynamics of politics in this country. The whole press to have the Epstein files released and the whole, oh, is Donald Trump in the Epstein files? And are you still talking about that? Oh, Ghislaine Maxwell, I haven't heard that name in so long. It's, you know, easy to lose track of details in a situation like this. And, forget how absolutely unbelievable it is that this woman met with Trump's lawyer, who, he's working for the government now, but he used to be Trump's private lawyer. I think he's probably looking out for Trump's personal interests, not just the interests of the president or the country or whatever, right? She gets moved to a much nicer, much cushier prison against the actual, rules and regulations for that. Like, a person with her type of offenses is not eligible to be in that type of prison. Now, I want to pause for a second here and just say, we need prison reform in this country so badly that nobody deserves to have extrajudicial punishment added on to their prison sentences by having to be in underfunded prisons that don't have appropriate heating or cooling, don't have appropriate food, don't have appropriate facilities. Ideally, all criminals would be getting equal, appropriate, and just treatment in jail. So I'm not necessarily against the idea of Ghislaine Maxwell not being treated poorly in prison. However, the circumstances that led to her being where she is currently are breathtakingly corrupt. Just breathtakingly corrupt. But that's not the biggest problem that I have with this whole issue right now. Because over and over and over again, when I hear people talk about this, talk about Ghislaine, talk about her crimes, they act like she was just, the madam for Jeffrey Epstein. And, that she just kind of helped facilitate his sickness. And sorry about that. Yeah, that's just not true. That is a full misrepresentation of why that woman is where she belongs, which is in prison. Before I made this video, I wanted to do a little bit of research just to make sure that I had, some of the specifics right. And I went back and I read the AP article that was posted when she was convicted. So this is going to be, pretty non-political, pretty, centrist, just the facts, ma'am kind of stuff. It's the AP. And when I was reading what the testimony was in her trial about how a 14-year-old girl was groomed and brought by her to Jeffrey, who exposed himself and pleasured himself in front of her, she said she'd never seen a man's genitals before that. 14. She also said that Ghislaine was part of the physical abuse. That it wasn't just that she was leading her like a lamb to slaughter, but that she was one of the butchers. And she's not the only person who was involved in that trial who would testify that Maxwell was directly involved in and physically, sexually abusing her directly, not by proxy through Epstein. Maxwell literally touched her and sexually assaulted her. And I just think it's so strange how there's this attitude about her. And I understand that it's what her defense, legal defense was arguing, what her, people who want to see her get away with her crimes would be, oh, she's just being prosecuted for Jeffrey's crimes. She didn't do anything. She was just, there, and he did stuff, and that's just not the record. The record shows this is not the case. Having that attitude about Maxwell is just wrong. Incorrect. Factually incorrect. She has been convicted of child sex abuse. Like, I don't know why we don't see her that way. But I kind of do. Because I do remember Mary Kay Letourneau, if you're unfamiliar, possibly young enough that you would not know about this, Mary Kay Letourneau was a teacher who got impregnated by one of the students at her elementary school. And after she got caught doing that, she would still sneak around with him and got pregnant again while he was still a teenager. And the only reason she probably stopped getting pregnant with his children while he was a teenager was because they put her in prison. And she had groomed him so well that when she got out of prison, he decided to try to be with her. But the power imbalance, that it's just so gross, He was a child. Why would you want to raise children with somebody who abused you as a child? Wow. Anyway, the way that people would talk about that case. I was reading an article that was about this, about how female sexual predators are not spoken about much at all in pop culture. And when they aren't often characterized as abusers. The article that I was reading, I'll link that in the description, it mentioned Stifler's mom from American Pie. And I remember that trope, with the high school guy wanting to get with the hot older woman. Whereas now I realize that's rape. Like, Stifler's mom raped a high schooler? Not okay, you know? And anytime that there's, unfortunately, a female teacher who uses her position and her access to children to predate on those children, you get idiots who are like, oh, that young boy really, assuming it's a heterosexual predator, of course. But, they'll be like, oh, yeah, that guy, he's so lucky. Oh, I wish I got it. Gross. Gross. What kind of adult woman would want to sleep with a teenage boy? They are children. I used to work at a group home for teens. I worked with boys that were between the age of 12 and 17. And let me tell you, they are children, okay? Very much so. They're getting there by the time they're 17. By the time they're 18, most of them are mature enough to act as functional adults in society, given they have the correct support system. But they definitely don't from 17 and under. They just very rarely are you ever going to meet a 17-year-old who is that mature. And that's good. They're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be learning how to be adults, learning how to be themselves, what being them means. And why in the world? But here's the thing. I have to step back and say, well, I'm asexual. I'm aromantic. I don't have a drive to necessarily be physical with other people frequently. And so, of course, my perspective on this is going to be a little bit different. I literally cannot understand why someone would be so, like, romantically and physically attracted to someone that they would ruin their whole life over it. But people do it all the time. So obviously, there are people, allosexuals, alloromantics, who feel drives I don't feel. And so I have to keep that in mind when I think about this. I think that's part of why we have such a hard time talking about this as a society, because we live in a society that ignores the existence of asexual and aromantic people. It is very easy for people to misunderstand the importance of sexual desires and romantic desires. If you're somebody who's never been exposed to the concept of asexuality, you've grown up in a very conservative household, and you are aspec on some level, and you don't feel romantic or sexual attraction the way that some other people do, how are you going to understand those other people's actions? It's really easy for somebody who is asexual to not have sexual contact outside of their primary relationship. Really easy. Because they don't want to. Like, they don't have that. It's like, if you don't like shrimp, it's really easy to avoid the temptation of eating shrimp, right? Same thing with asexuals. And so for all of the asexuals that are out there in the world that have power, that don't know they're asexual, passing judgment on other people, they cannot understand the actual reason why people act the way they do. However, there are ways to help express that desire healthfully and without hurting people, underage or otherwise. And I think we as a society are so squeamish of talking about female sexuality that it makes it hard for us to comprehend the idea of a female sexual predator like Ghislaine Maxwell, like Mary Kay Letourneau. You know, I something like 20% of the time, young boys that are abused, it's a woman, a female perpetrator. It's like 5% for underage young ladies. So, I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of a difference there, but that's still a significant amount of people. We don't give sexual abuse survivors of female predators the understanding and respect they deserve, especially male victims, but even so, female victims, like these victims of Maxwell, we just tend to downplay the effect of their abuse, sweep it under the rug. It's clearly it's not as bad, right? But that's not what the studies show. Studies show that sexual abuse with a female perpetrator has the exact same type of impacts as sexual abuse from a male perpetrator. And it does not matter on the gender of the victim. It doesn't matter the gender of the perpetrator or the victim. Sexual abuse is traumatizing and horrible and something that we need to actually find a way to address effectively in this country. And our squeamishness talking about things like this are a big stumbling block for us. You know, how can we even begin to fully discuss the issue of Maxwell and her crimes and what punishment she deserves if we can't look and see that her crimes are not something that you can just dismiss or downplay? It wasn't just leading girls, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, young girls, not talking about, 17, 18, 19, young women who were still too young for them to be abusing, obviously, but are more mature. 14 is very young. Like, all summer, I had my 13-year-old goddaughter here with me. And she is relatively mature for her age. I can't even imagine someone taking her, say, next summer and say, I got a good job for you. I'm going to get you connections. I'm going to really, build you up so that you feel comfortable and you trust me, and then completely betray that trust. It makes me shake with anger almost, because this woman is this close to getting a pardon from our criminal, corrupt president in order to benefit himself personally. She's already getting preferential treatment in the prison system, and she's this close to just getting all of the penalties for her crimes just wiped away because of politics. And I don't think that the public would be as willing as they may be to overlook that. There's going to be Trump supporters who would overlook that. I don't think they would do that if they really fully understand. This is a pedophile. This is a woman who abused children herself. She did it. It wasn't just her helping someone else commit crime. She committed the crime. But we can't talk about that. Partially because on social media platforms like this, saying the word pedophile is probably going to get my video suppressed. Well, I can't talk about a pedophile without calling her a pedophile, right? And so if I want to talk about Maxwell and be able to get more views on my social medias, I'm going to be apt to either downplay or dismiss or talk around what she did. It's a lot easier to avoid the indirect censorship that we get from social media companies if you just don't touch on what she actually did. You just say, oh, she was Epstein's girlfriend and she got him victims. Yeah, that's part of it. That's a part. There's more important things that we don't talk about. And it's frustrating to me because while sexual assault is more often done by male perpetrators, the victims of female perpetrators are still real. They're still valid. They're still important. They are still someone who a crime was committed against them. And the fact that that crime isn't taken seriously or as seriously just because of the gender or sex of the person who, was a criminal and acted against them, that's just ridiculous. Honestly, ridiculous. I just struggle. I struggle to understand how it is that this fact just gets glossed over. Because to me, it's so important because the whole sex trafficking thing, she's the only person who was ever successfully convicted for it. And we know there had to be other people involved in certain ways. And we know there were a lot of people who were paid to look the other direction and probably bore at least some culpability. And yet she was the one who we focused all of our energy on as a country. We didn't get to prosecute Epstein, but we'll get to prosecute her. And it was almost like there was this idea that she was being tried in absentia for Jeffrey instead of her being charged with crimes that she committed. We kind of accepted this narrative that she was a scapegoat. And I think it's very funny how interested everyone became in her now, when she's been here all along. We have the testimony in her case. We have survivors who can tell us what happened. All along, we've been acting like we need these Epstein files to be released in order to be able to, see who was really committing the crimes and hold them accountable. But we've had all these pieces all along. We just haven't had the political will to do much with it. And the only people who seemed to speak to that were the Republicans, who implied that they were going to release the list, or not even applied, directly said, oh, we're going to release the list if you give us power. They campaigned on that. And that was a mistake. So then they won. And then the people that voted for them actually expected them to follow through. And there's a lot of powerful people who would like for us to stop talking about this. You know, I am sick of living in a society that just accepts that people who are rich and or powerful get to get away with things, get different justice system, healthcare system. You know, we may not have a strict like legal caste system, but those of us that are working class, the owner class, they have a existence separated from us, and they believe that they don't have to bear the cost of their actions. And this this is an opportunity for that to actually happen, for there to be consequences for people who thought that they would never have to be held to any sort of standard, held to account for what they've done. And they're going to resist that, like with everything they can. I mean, right now we have Trump, who is in office, and I think that he really ran mainly because he wanted to stay out of jail, which, you know, he's in the middle of being prosecuted for multiple federal crimes, did get prosecuted and convicted of state crimes. He probably would have been in jail right now if he had lost. We have Benjamin Netanyahu, who pretty much is keeping this war, the military offensive on Gaza, ongoing, and has gone out of his way to arm Hamas because he believed Hamas being in power was better because they were easier to control. Like, yes, the reason October 7th happened is because Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to keep power. He wanted people to be afraid of Hamas, afraid enough that they would vote for him to protect them, when he was the one who actually facilitated, armed Hamas, made it possible, and then used that as an excuse to just continuously bombard Gaza ever since. And this is because he wants to keep his place of power. He doesn't want to bear the consequences of his action. He very well could end up in prison if he ever is out of power. Not just internationally. We all know that there's like, you know, international warrants out for his arrest. But I'm talking about like domestically. He is corrupt. He's facing criminal, procedures in his own country. You know, so like this is a transparent thing that is happening right in front of us, and I want to see that change. I would love to see people who think that they're above the law have to actually answer to it. And, you know, Ghislaine Maxwell right now, she's where she ought to be in a certain sense because she's incarcerated, but she's certainly not where she's supposed to be in a legal sense. And that contradiction is worrying. And I'm concerned that the way that we mischaracterize her as a country, the way we don't talk about who she actually is and what she actually did accurately, might make it easier for her to be yet another rich person who thinks she's above us, getting away with horrible crimes just because of politics and her sex. All right, family members. I think I got it all out. Take care of yourselves, and be nice to any male sexual abuse victims. You know, they don't get nearly as much support and love as they need. So keep them in mind. All right, love you. Bye.